You all here, and I'm thanking you in advance for your patience. What I have to share is as a witness to the lives of the core leaders of the nonviolent civil rights movement, and what I witnessed over the course of 50 years in how they demonstrated the depth of their faith in ways that are deeper than many of us are capable of thinking about. In 2010, Andrew Young spoke to Montreat College. They had Newt Gingrich speak that fall, and they got some feedback that they thought maybe they needed a little balancing, and so I was asked to do something. So I picked Andrew Young up from his house around March 21st, 2010, and drove him up to Montreat to speak, and put him in the Grove Park Inn. I told him he should be in the concierge level, so they did. And while we were driving up, John Lewis was Deputy Majority Whip of the United States Congress, and Congress passed the Affordable Care Act while we were driving up. So the next morning when we picked him up at the Grove Park Inn, they had those USA Today, Wall Street, and New York Times papers complimentary for that. And John Lewis is on the cover of all three of those for that leadership. Andy Young gave a speech to the college. Afterwards, I'm passing books to him up on the stage in the National Auditorium. A Cub Scout named Noah, in his Cub Scout uniform, asked Andy, how did it make you feel when you saw Martin Luther King killed? The bullet went over Andy's head, struck Dr. King in the face, and severed his jaw. Andy said he was confident, based on the autopsy, that his spinal cord was severed by that bullet and that he suffered no pain. He took comfort in that. But this kid says, how did it make you feel to see Martin Luther King killed? Everybody stopped what they're doing in line up on the stage there. He paused for a long 20 seconds. He said, I was angry. I wasn't worried about Martin. I knew he'd be all right. I was angry at Martin for leaving us. I didn't know what we were going to do. It was 1 year after that bullet that my story begins. With my architecture degree, I went to Atlanta and I'm assigned to a slum urban renewal neighborhood. A few blocks from Morehouse College, Atlanta University, and Spelman, and so forth. I'd never had a conversation of intellectual matter of any sort with a non-white person in my life. And I'm 22, 3 years old. That was a long time ago, and my first integrated two experience was briefly in the senior year in high school. Virginia Tech, my architecture, there were a few black students, but they weren't architects, and all I did was in that lab for 5 years. I moved to this neighborhood, West End, 2 years older than the city of Atlanta and only 2 miles from the San Spike of Atlanta. The population was mixed, black and white, but you couldn't tell it was mixed because a lot of the black families lived in the middle block without an address, and the white folks had the houses up on the street. And I hadn't walked the neighborhood. I just bought a house and moved in. And it wasn't long before I discovered what Andy was so concerned about. I didn't know what we were going to do. You see, these folks who led Southern Christian Leadership Conference of all preachers. And then John Lewis and the students that founded the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in Nashville. They're an American Baptist Bible College. They'd come into an understanding of faith that is beyond what I've been exposed to. And when Dr. King was killed, there was a sense of doom. That this nonviolent movement got us nowhere, even though there were advances in voting rights and so forth. That, the heck with fighting, self-determination, so forth. And so the anger replaced the nonviolent thought. And so, in about my second year there, I bought a second house. It wasn't hard to buy a house because nobody could get financing. They just signed the deed over to you and you'd agree to pay by renting it out. And in a 30-day period in the month of May, about my second year there were 20 muggings and armed robberies within 100 yards of my front door, in which most of the victims had to be hospitalized. I picked up a woman who was in her 80s, her glasses smashed into her face sideways, and tended to her. We got her in an ambulance, and a beautiful late spring day, and I walked over far to hear the car pictures, and my 90-year-old who was renting the house next to me was on the ground, having been beaten and robbed. These folks doing this were teenagers. They were picking up on this anger of the parents. They were picking up on this built-up anger over years. But John Lewis, Andrew Young, Martin Luther King, Ralph Abernathy, C.T. Vivian, these folks that I got to know so well, other than King, of course, who was gone. They had a depth of faith that was beyond my exposure as a preacher's kid and growing up in the church all my life. They believed that Jesus was serious about everything he said. And this came out of necessity, because their existence in slave times and Jim Crow, which was pretty horrible, was so oppressive that it was hard not to be bitter and angry and give up on society and anything resembling brotherhood. They believed that when Jesus said, "Turn the other cheek and forgive me, know not what they do," he was giving us permission to forgive the non-repentant. Trust God with justice. I know something about it, a little bit of it in the Old Testament. So you don't carry the bitterness toward what happened to you, so that you can focus on healing. As a white population, if we have the experience, say that Joe Biden had, he lost a wife and a child, and we remember how he came to heal, and we'll talk about healing. I don't know who caused the accident that killed his family. But if you're white, we could survive something that horrible and heal and live a joyful life. Never dismissing what happened, but get beyond it. But if that was not the exception but the rule, if any member of your family could be taken from you, they could be killed and no paperwork, you couldn't have a job, whatever, that was too hard to bear. And so they evolved through what was called a Black Bible, and I understand there are 2 copies left. If anybody knows about one in the Bible Museum in D.C. It didn't deal with slavery. Moses coming out, Jesus wasn't in there. It wasn't allowed. But once the slave owners introduced the Bible to say, obey your masters, you couldn't keep them from learning the rest of it. And they came to believe that this was truly a gift. You forgive the non-repentant. So, I did not know Dr. King. I became limited, but thankfully a confidant of this King. But the others I got to know because of I was in 30 years in that neighborhood before I moved to Montreat in '99. And when I moved to Montreat in '99, I brought them with me. When I, in '99, was leaving Atlanta, I knew so much about race and prejudice, I wanted to teach about it. Janetta Cole, President Spelman, who got $50,000 from Reader's Digest, wanted from Portier and another bunch from Cosby, incredible woman, said, I need you telling your story in front of CEOs with blue eyes, aware that prejudice was still here in '99. And so John Lewis and C.T. Vivian and Andrew Young wrote these wonderful letters about my credentials to do that, but nobody really wanted to talk about it. In '98, I'm talking to Mrs. King. I'm helping with a personal matter. I called her, giving her a report. Her sister had some health problems with her immune system, and so I was president of the Rotary Club. We met at the Stadium Club, and there were 29 clubs, but mine was the one with free parking. And so everybody did their makeups there. So I knew the Surgeon General, and I knew the head of CDC. We weren't buddies, but they knew who I was, and I could make a call in his ring, thing going on there. And so I'm talking to Ms. King, and I'd given her my report. And then she just began talking for about 20 minutes, and I felt rather privileged. Very few people had her own number. And she said, you know, John said maybe the National Institute could help. Well, that's Fauci, but I didn't know anybody in National. So I said, Ms. King, you know, you have a name. You could make a call. They're going to take your call. And she said, Wade, you know, it's funny. When I make a phone call and have to give my name, when I say my name, I'll get some young girl, she gets so excited she can't help me. And then a third of the time, I say my name and nothing. But 1/3 of the time, when I say my name, the person becomes ugly and rude. Just that Mrs. Martin Luther King is on the phone. That was 98. That was 1/3 of the time. That was the 30% that helped a man win the presidency by capitalizing on that stuff. But so I'll come up here, and I'd love to tell everybody how we misunderstand about each other, so forth. But then I brought them with me, and so I'm getting to know them more and more, and deeper into the faith that let them do this. John Lewis is the most remarkable man I've ever known. The Montgomery newspaper did a story about this young preacher who was 15 years old. It was John Lewis, 15. At 23 years old, he's speaking right before Dr. King in Montreat, Washington. At 30-something, whatever, he was born in 40, so whatever 1975 is, he and Mother Teresa listed as saints. I spent so much time with him and just witnessing the purity of heart and how he treated everybody. There's a 100-foot tall, 80-foot tall mural of him on one of the buildings in Atlanta. There's statues and so forth, but he never was self-promoting. There's a photograph over there in the Oval Office with King and all those the big 6 civil rights leaders. Kennedy was so relieved March on Washington, but finally invited him over. But in the shadow in the back is John Lewis, never out front. But always doing the right thing. So, black nationalism was coming to get me. And I had gotten to know Dr. Avenue, who succeeded Dr. King, as he moved his church into the abandoned white church across the street from my house. And as it turns out, in 1974, I had 25 houses. Didn't have any money, but I had deeds to 25 houses. And so I had a vision of maybe I could do something that would change the way, the experience of living in this neighborhood. You see, I'd grown up a preacher's kid. I never had a weight problem. I was a preacher's kid. We were always treated well. Always treated well. Even when we got in trouble, we treated well. I didn't get in trouble. Being a preacher's kid's a bad name. But I go to college. Well, I'm poor, but I'm a college kid. I get my architecture degree. I'm poor. I'm making $140 a week, but I'm an intern architect. But living on People Street in West End, I'm a slum resident. The trash man threw the garbage can at me one morning just because they knew he could. You go to the counter of the store, nobody waits on you. Because not only they don't wait on you, they don't acknowledge you in the store. Well, that was new to me. As we had this exhibit on our home in Montreat, and the youth groups would come up here, we would always rent to the youth groups, and we'd take that group down the hall, and all these, many of these photographs were up. And I would tell them about the faith of these people. But then I'd tell them something to understand what the Civil Rights Movement was about. These are teenagers. This is in this century. And so I had a way of telling them. I would say, if love is the most powerful human emotion, what's the second and what's the third? So if love is the most powerful, antithesis would be hate, that's the second. So what would be the third? Any number of things would be, but I would say it's humiliation. Civil rights movement was about humiliation. Don't come here, don't go there, don't do this, and never in a nice tone. The tone they used with Mrs. King, even in '98. And I'd say, love, take it to extreme, you give your life for another person. Hate, take it to extreme, might take the life of another person. Humiliation, take it to extreme, you might take your own life. Teenage suicide. Teenagers who could get it. So then there's the issue of this faith. So I began to work on rebuilding these houses. My notion was if I could take these 25 houses, there were 1,200 houses in this neighborhood considered a slum. If I could take and redo them, take them apart and put them back together like new houses, they would still be cheaper than a new house because they had the lot and the house there. And could I get big brothers and big sisters, people of societal substance, to come in and buy those houses? So you couldn't treat us like we were nobody because we might be somebody. That was my vision. I had no idea how it paralleled with the faith beliefs of these leaders. They believed in what they called the beloved community, in which if you did everything that Jesus told us to do, not a few menu items on the cafeteria, if you did it all, if you treated everybody as you would like to be treated, if you treated everybody that, you would have heaven on this side of the grave. They call it the beloved community. And it's just sort of paired with my notion of human dignity. There's a statue of John Lewis that was put up after his death in the DeKalb County Courthouse. It's about 12 feet tall, and it's not about John Lewis. It's entitled Empathy. His face is sort of just painful. He was known for caring and for acting out his faith. And so I'm into rebuilding these houses, but the nationalists are coming after me. How whites are taking back black neighborhoods. They evidently came to see me, but they were pleased when they saw what they saw, and it showed pictures, but we did not make that article. But I was trying to get approval from the town for brick sidewalks and gas lights, because the town needed to fund it. And I had to go before a neighborhood organization, neighborhood planning unit, in the basement of St. Anthony's Catholic Church. And there were these nationalist leaders that had organized about 50 people in this basement, and they're coming down and just yelling at me. And you know, you're just a private developer, you just want to make money and all this sort of stuff. And I'm saying, well, how much money? I said, I have no idea. If I make money and I don't borrow a lot of money, I hope I can pay it back. And they're angry. And finally I said, well, we're trying to get city's approval for this and funding for our sidewalks and stuff. And I said, we've had support of city council. So well, the president of city council hollers out, you're a liar. And I'm sort of taken it back, and because that wasn't my impression of our relationship. And an 18-year-old kid stands up, says, my name is so-and-so Ezra, and I live in my house on Oakville Avenue, across from the work Mr. Burns is doing. And our porch has been falling in for about 15 years, and we've been trying to get help, and you politicians have done nothing. You just talk, and done nothing. And I'm 18, I can vote now. But Wade Burns loaned my sister money to fix the porch. So the crowd did one of those things on the Hallmark movie, they cheered, so I got parallel to this, I went to Maynard, first black neighborhood alive. I told him, he knew what I was doing, we'd met several times. And I told him about the concerns. And so he puts John Dale Johnson in his car and me in his car, and the policeman drives us out to my house in West End. And we're walking into that house. This is my first house. The floor sort of sloped like this. And she said, Maynard, don't you just see this as another black removal project? And Maynard says, John Dale, the cost of operating this city is going up at a higher rate than the tax base. We need these houses rebuilt. If you don't get people at Atlanta University to come buy them, that's your fault, not his. Ralph Abernathy, I sat down with him with this concern, and he listened. And after I left, he quietly just put the word out. What he's doing is what the SCLC was all about. I had 25 houses, one city block. I was on 3 streets around it, and then on both sides of the street. I'm rebuilding the houses for 4 years, from 74 to 78. All the animosity went away. No vandalism. 2 public schools, one a block and a half that way, one a block and a half that way. Ralph Abernathy. He was dismissed as a leadership of Southern Michigan, but you couldn't dismiss the authority he had for what they had accomplished. He had an authority that no politician had, and that word changed it. I never locked the door of a house until we painted the sheetrock. 2 acts of vandalism in those 4 years, and both culprits were brought to my house by their ears by their grandmothers. Preteens who were forced to apologize. just the difference in this group of leaders who operated from the depth of faith, where treating people right was what we ought to do. In the quarter century I've lived here and continued these friendships, just over and over again, I would see this. John Lewis, it was 2 weeks after Obama's inauguration. I went down to Atlanta, stayed with him in his house, and he's telling me about, there's a little side story, but he's telling me about the morning of the inauguration. Before I tell you that, I need to say one other thing, another chapter in all this. After I'd restored the neighborhood and all this sort of stuff, and I was recognized and treated well and so forth, I had a vision. I wanted to buy this 1 million square foot warehouse built in 1990 and make it a home products merchandise mart, something to bring economic development to the black community. And Maynard, I talked to him about it, the city owned it. I talked about it, I want to do this, and he said, yeah, but it's not time yet, not time. So Maynard went out of office, Maynard Jackson, and Andy came in, and it came up for bids, and so I bid on it. But there was a second bidder. It was the National Black Baptist Convention. And this is close to 1980, something like that. And so I went to talk to my city councilman. He'd just been elected. And I'm telling him what I want to do. I was hoping that I'd receive some consideration for a bid. And I'm told, no need. It's been decided. We're going to go with the Baptist. Doesn't matter. We're not looking at this going. And so this city councilman is going through the development committee. In Montreat, you're familiar with committees. So it's going through the development committee. And my city councilman stands up and says, this is not right. This deal is wired. The lawyer for this group is the president of the city council. The architect of this group is the husband of the mayor's chief of staff. This is not right. The president of the city council, same one who called me a liar, says under his breath, I'm going to kill that SO. He thought he said under his breath for the Constitution reporter. The Atlanta Constitution heard him, and he comes to me. And well, what's your thing? So I gave him copies of my bid and all my proposals. I went to the Baptist. They wouldn't give him anything. That was a bad move. So I have a scrapbook of stories about my bid to try to bring this development to the black community, and Andy Young's administration choosing the wrong bidder who never was able to do anything. My city councilman was named John Lewis. And so the black leadership recognized Andrew Young's authority, well deserved, and so John was alienated. He was sort of stepped aside. He said what he believed. That was his strength. If he believed it, he said it. If he believed it was right, he did it. And so John was sort of on the outskirts of that with black leadership. And he's running for city council. And my closest black friend was Julian Bond, and he was who he was running against. And John's wife said, wait, I want you to put up a sign in your yard. Julian was a close friend. John Lewis had risked everything to stand up for me, so I put a John Lewis sign in my yard. So, the arc of time, 2 weeks after the inauguration, of Obama, John Lewis, Deputy Majority Whip of the United States Congress, and had well overcome having offended anybody. And so he's telling me about the morning of the inauguration. I'm getting something more important after this. I'm telling you, this was fun. He got there early, and it was so cold. He said, and these people recognized me. Remember, he never put himself out front. He was never boastful. They kept recognizing me. All these people were coming up to me, and the crowd got so big, and I couldn't move, and the Capitol Police drove a car slowly through the crowd to put me in it and take me back out of the crowd. And so I went to my seat. It was so cold. And the Capitol Policeman came to me and said, Mr. Lewis, Aretha is in the room in here. So I went in and visited with Aretha, and I went back to my seat, and then the president, Obama came out of the end of the building, and he walked by, and he stopped and he bent over and gave me a hug, and I hugged him, and I said, congratulations, Mr. President. He said, you're the first to call me that. He said, I love you, and he said, I love you too. And he went on sworn in. And so after the swearing in, they're in the statuary hall for the luncheon, and everybody all the members of Congress got a photograph of the swearing in. And I took my picture over to the president, and I handed it to him. He said, John, because of you, Barack. The next morning, 2 weeks after this, John Lewis had to move out of the house he'd been in during the movement. His wife was on dialysis twice a week. And so he had to get a new place. And so he had dreamed of this house, which had been featured in the New York Times Sunday magazine as a meeting place. It would be a museum. And so my trip to Atlanta was to help him with this house. So we were going to go see what I could do. I do a little bit of renovating houses and stuff like that, what I could do. And so I spent the night with him, and that's when he signed some of those things. So the next morning we drive up to this house in the better part of the black neighborhood than the one I lived in. And it's a single carport, and we get up there, he turns the key, but the door couldn't open, and he pushes the door. We both push it. And we get the door open, and the house had been destroyed. Homes had moved in, sold appliances, ripped out copper pipes to sell, boxes and boxes of memorabilia and stuff, historical, flooded in the basement. Grease everywhere, appliances gone, a little TV this size, still running with a pornography tape in it. A dream of his, he's recognized by now. It should be a museum. And all this stuff destroyed. This is his response. Looks like we got work to do. We get in his car, we go to Home Depot, got rubber gloves and trash bags and stuff like that. We come out of the house. He calls the chief of staff, he made a few calls to Atlanta University, and some students started coming over. And we're picking up stuff and bagging up stuff, and everybody's just having a good time. And you see these kids walking around with a cell phone. They're talking to grandmama. You won't believe where I am. And John goes up, takes the phone. Hello, John, who's in? You have my fine grandson here. Wouldn't you be angry? Wouldn't you just be so bitter? How would you just be so at peace with them? Because John forgave as the injuries occurred. In one of those photographs on Bloody Sunday, the baton of the state troopers up like this, fixing to come down his head. I've got the little thing in there of what he would do when he was being beaten 4 times pretty seriously. That man wouldn't mind killing him. When he was being beaten, he would curl up in a ball, put his arm up to protect his head, and visualize the person beating him as an infant, with his belief that each child is born with the spark of the divine, and so he could forgive them while they're beating him. How do you have that kind of peace? There's a street called Seminary. Is it Seminary? John Newton, the late John Newton lived there. John Newton was a pastor in Selma on Bloody Sunday. Margaret was about 6 years old. Margaret Warstrat. John Newton, Margaret asked me to speak to his funeral. The Peachtree Presbyterian Church had about the largest Presbyterian congregation in the country at that time. Big church. It was his funeral. There were 13 rows of just elders. Richard DeBose is then the development officer with the Seminary in Atlanta, Columbia. So he had somebody sitting on the very back row. He's telling his friends that this won't take long, but then he noticed my name on the program and said, oh, it'll be longer. And so I was asked to speak. I said, John Newton was always smiling. He's always smiling. So Frank Harrington, the senior pastor, would put him up front at the end of the church, so when someone came up to him, it'd be John Newton there with his gregarious, warm reception. And I said, you know, when we're babies, we'll smile at anybody that, you know, giggles with us. But when we get older and we smile at people, they don't smile back. We stop smiling at folks. And so we move around and we're not so friendly. John Newton was always friendly. If you didn't smile back, John Newton must have forgiven you because he's going to keep on smiling. It was a small thing, but it's one of those things in the lessons of Jesus, of what you do. And Jesus was serious about it all. And they came to accept this as truth because it was what enabled them to survive, what enabled them to know peace. When I was about this tall, and I would go from the barn back to my house on Alabama, to my grandparents' house on Alabama Terrace, and walk by what's now the post office, the upstairs attic of what's now the post office was a recreation place for the domestic workers in Montreat. And there would be hooting and hollering and laughing like you never saw. They couldn't do that in public, but together up there in that upstairs in the post office on Friday night or Saturday night, whichever it was, they did. But they were all allowed to go up there for recreation. Where's that joy come from? And so when Mother Emanuel massacre happens, and an awful lot of people remember this. How was it those survivors would go on CNN and say, yeah, I've forgiven that man. How does that happen? It came out of the Southern Black Church. It came out of this understanding that Jesus was serious about grace. That what he died demonstrated. And that's a lesson to change the way you live your life. I've just watched it in each of these people and how they respond. If we're walking through security in the Capitol building, he didn't pass anybody if he's not looking in the eye. And it's just a Capitol policeman or anybody. I was a campaign manager for the 101st Congress, and we had a little in my backyard. There were probably about 10 of them that day used to go to here and here and here. And so John is talking to one of my neighbors, a white guy with sort of long hair, and he was telling John about his screen porch he was repairing. And here's John, greet everybody all day long. And someone said, John, come on, won't you meet somebody? Take John over. I'm sort of watching this in my backyard. And I watched the ethnic circle. And John comes back. I'm sorry I was interrupted. You were telling me about your screen porch. Who does that? What politician does that? C.T. Vivian. C.T. Vivian, who was senior to King by 15 or 20 years, I'm not sure how much. But he would tell King where to go, where the spots were, where it needed to be. Because Julian had been this was this great friend, and he would tell me about his childhood, where W.B. Du Bois and Albert Einstein would come and stay at his house. And so I want to make sure that our boys, Scott and Connor, grew up with this sort of access. And so 6 days after C.T. Vivian received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Obama, we went down and spent the afternoon with C.T. Vivian. And he's showing the boys, and Scott's in the 60s. Scott is 24 now and engaged to a girl he met on a tennis course at Montreat. But he's in the 6th grade then. And C.C. tells him about how I developed my philosophy on nonviolence. Said in the 30s when I went to school, my mother had to send me to another town where there'd be a school I could go to. And 6th grade was all the education we could get in those days. But I decided in 3rd grade I didn't like bullying. I just wasn't going to take bullying. It just wasn't right. Bullying was wrong. And so I decided that anybody who bullied, I would beat them up. And tell them you can't bully anybody in the 3rd grade or I'll beat you up. And so he said that then in the 6th grade there was this tough guy named Theodore. I knew we'd have to deal with this. He's telling this to my 6-year-old son. And so, sure enough, time came. So we made arrangements to be off-site where we wouldn't get in trouble. And he knocked me down, I knocked him down, he knocked me down, I knocked him down. And after about 3 times, we decided it wasn't working. So on the last day of school, they would take a graduation picture on the fire escape of the school, because 6th grade was all the education we were going to have. And Theodore and I made all of the children on that fire escape swear they'd never fight again in their life. When Warren Wilson asked me to bring somebody up to speak 20-some years ago, C.T. and I were going to come up and do a Ebony and Ivory thing, and Doug Orr, he said, "What we need somebody heard of." I said, well, so I gave his resume from C.T. Vivian. He didn't. I said, he evidently wants somebody white people. C.T. had exposed to the United Nations in the last 6 months, served on 2 commissions at the White House, been lifted 17 times by Pulitzers, and about 20 hours on public television. And I would watch. C.T. would teach. Oh, and he was the only person to be single guest on Oprah Winfrey Show 2 days in a row, because he would teach you about our prejudices and so forth. But it just they're all preachers. They all found the reward, the return for doing what Jesus said. And so I've got to squeeze the story in. So, Andy Young. When John Lewis stands up and says this deal's not right, all these bad editorials came out, and Andy Young's looking bad. And there was one that said, this ho-hum 1 million square foot warehouse shouldn't be anything, but it is something. It's up for bid, and a lone white developer been flattened by the largest black organization in America. So the first example of Andy Young's loosey-goosey style of government. And Andy caught a lot of flack for that. That particular editorial in the Constitution came out, and so I'm the victim. And if you're a victim, you know, hey man, it's sort of nice being a victim if you get sort of, you know, props for it. And I called my father, who was dying. He was in Whiteville, North Carolina. He lived another number of months, but he couldn't lift his head off the pillow, and I read him this editorial. And he said, "This is terrible. What are you going to do about it?" He said, "You know, this has been your dream. What are you going to do about it?" I said, "I don't know." "What's been your dream for all this time? What are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "So simple." So what? He said, "You forgive him." Well, look, I didn't have this honor and suffering thing, right? I thought you forgive them because they know not what they do. Well, surely Andy had to know. There's 2 of us, you know. And he'd been in their home as a guest, one-on-one and whatnot. And surely it just flushed over me. Sure, turned loose. A year or so later, I go into his, I wanted to go to his office, but I couldn't get in. So I talked to Shirley Franklin, who would be the mayor after him, chief staff, and I said, I need to see Andy. She said, he's not going to talk to you because of all this bad publicity. It's like I'm narcissistic. I said, I need to see him. She said, he's not going to do it. I said, if I sat in his outer office all day long, he'd see me. She said, you're probably right, go home. I'll call you. So the next day, I went in for my 2 o'clock appointment. So he's sitting behind his desk. I walk into my little portfolio. Said, Andy, I know you know what I've done in West End, but I want to show you what I've done in these other towns since then. In case there's anything you want to do in Atlanta that maybe I can help you with. That was it. Just up from behind his desk, I'm sitting aside and flipping pages and going and we're done. So I'm bringing Andy up here to speak. I want to make sure I knew everything, so I had read his biography and everything. Andy graduated from Howard, 60. He was a track star and he wanted to go to the Helsinki Olympics. And so his plan was to go back to New Orleans, where his father was a dentist, and practice for the Olympics Games. But on his way back from Howard, they stopped at Kings Mountain in North Carolina. They were Congregationalists, and there was a retreat. And at that retreat, he decided he was going to serve the Lord. I'm not going to be a preacher, but I'm going to serve the Lord. He gets back to New Orleans. He starts his training. He gets a call from the church. Andy, we need you to go to Marion, Alabama, to be a youth worker. Well, that's what God wants me to do. That's what I'm going to do. He gives up his Olympic dream. Goes to Marion, Alabama. So we're driving up here. We're driving back. One store selling Confederate memorabilia. So we're not stopping here. We're driving back, and he started talking about the warehouse. He said, you know, I learned an awful lot about the Baptists and whatnot. And he's talking about what didn't have said. I never really worried about money. I think was all really work out because he knew I had lost money when I was doing my home stuff at Jimmy Carter. And I said, you know, Andy, when all that stuff was about the county warehouses came up, I never said anything bad about you. But I wasn't smart enough to know there was something I should have said. I should have said, well, I believe in what I was doing, but I know Andrew Young is a really good man. His response, Wade, do you have to hurry back to Montreat? Can you stay a while? So we go to his house. So he's telling me about money. You know, never worry about money, things will work out. I knew about his giving up his life dream to be a church youth worker. And he says, I was walking through the Atlanta airport, and some man, you know, said, hello, Mayor, or something like that. And he said, I said to him, is that a Nelson Bible under your arm? He said, well, yes. Matter of fact, I'm Mr. Nelson. And he said he'd like to publish my story, and I told him, this is Andy talking, said I told him, my stories have been done, no thank you. But he asked for my agent's name, so I might give it to him. He said, 6 weeks later I get a call from my agent. Well, Andy had done a capital campaign for the church, and when national campaign, when they finished, Andy made a pledge of $2,500 a year for 30 years. They said, Andy, we will look at you for $50,000. And he said, Wade, I didn't have a pension as a congressman, as an ambassador to the United Nations, or as mayor of Atlanta. And all we had was Gene's pension as a school teacher, and I had a little pension as a youth worker. But Gene said, Andy, that's what they've asked us for. That's what we need to do. So we borrowed $50,000 of the house and gave them to the church. 6 weeks after this meeting in the airport, his agent calls up and says, Andy, you remember meeting Mr. Nelson at the airport? Said, well, maybe so. He said, well, he sent us a proposal. He wants to publish your sermons. He's offered an advance of $50,000. We get back to Atlanta where he's asked me if I have to hurry and can I stay by. And so we drive by the neighborhood I restored and then by the Jean Childs Young Middle School. Jean Childs was a saint. She was the daughter of the family he had to stay with because the church couldn't pay for his housing. She was off at college when he's given up his Olympic dream and staying with that family. He could have never met a better woman. He gives up his Olympic dream and he gets this incredible wife, and here's a school just named after her. He's driving by. The publisher of the Holy Bible personally reimburses him for a $50,000 donation to Victor's Church. We get to his house. He goes to change clothes to take me to lunch. I'm sitting in his living room by myself. Hanging on the wall about this size is a proclamation in Latin by the International Olympic Committee to the Honorable Andrew Young, not for a short distance run, but for a lifetime of working to the ideals of the International Olympic Committee, and hanging in the frame is Olympic gold, Olympic silver, and a gold, Olympic bronze medal. C.S. Lewis, God's timing. I have covered 50 to 60 years, and I just absorbed and witnessed this extraordinary quality of life, quality of contribution that came from a group of men and women who took the words of Jesus seriously. And David Lamont is going to give you a song about that.
Y'all give Wade Bird's hand. Wade asked me to play this song. It's not a peppy note to end on, but it's perhaps something to think about. I appreciate your words about taking the words of Jesus seriously. It was interesting to sit back there and watch you tell these remarkable stories with these words right behind you. I was really appreciating the motto of the Heritage Center in this context: honoring the past, informing the present, and influencing the future. Right? That's our work here today, all of us. I got to meet John Lewis because Wade invited me to go to the airport to pick him up when he was coming up here to speak, and Wade insisted on getting in the front of the van and putting me and John Lewis on the bench seat in the back of the van and giving us 45 minutes or so to just chat. Wouldn't say a word, just wanted us to talk. What a privilege for me. So when Wade calls me up and asks me if I can play a song, I'm going to play a song. What I'm saying, friend, may surprise you. Though I trust you will listen and hear. I'm not out to make you angry. We both know beneath our anger lies our fear. It sounds so simple, but it's so complicated. Not gentle, not just a warm feeling. Many will die in the name of peace. But war will not lead us to healing. And I meant what I said, Peter. put down your sword. Did you forget? Did you think I was joking? This is not why I'm here, Peter. Not to destroy. The world is already so broken. Maybe you think I'm a fool. Maybe a fool's what I am. Maybe I will die for nothing, and nothing will change in the end. Yes, I'm scared and I'm angry. But we live in this occupied land where Romans can kill us at random. But the Romans do not rule my hands. There are so many lives on the line here. This is not some philosopher's game. And if you draw your sword, Peter, you may not raise that sword in my name. And I meant what I said, Peter. Put down your sword. Did you forget? Did you think I was joking? This is not why I'm here, Peter. Not to destroy. The world is already so broken. Maybe you think I'm a fool. Maybe a fool's what I am. Maybe I will die for nothing, if nothing will change in the end. God bless the children of Abraham. God bless the Romans who reign. God bless the peacemakers and the warriors who each think the other insane. But I meant what I said, Peter. Put down your sword. Did you forget? Did you think I was joking?
So Jesus was serious about it all. And it's so easy for us to think, well, all I need to do is confess my sins, so casually, and I get glory. But these folks believed you could have heaven on this side of the grave by treating everybody as I'm said to treat them. We don't know what happens. I'm in the 80s. That's the decade, We're going to find out probably. But I'd rather not take a chance. Not that I'm able to meet that mark. But I saw those who did. And I saw them enjoy their lives. Fred Shuttlesworth, they dynamited his home 4 times. They didn't kill him. There's a photograph over there of 2 presidents tended to him in his wheelchair after a stroke. The arc of time. Doing the right thing because you believe it's the right thing has a reward beyond what we lose holding on to not just the bitterness or hatred towards somebody, but just the thought they're not worth meeting. They're not worth a conversation. We're at an interesting place. It's an interesting time. It's my hope that this message of grace for the unrepentant, that everything Jesus said was serious, survives. It was kept alive with those who were enslaved and those who grew up in Jim Crow, because it was so rough. If you forgot those lessons, then the bitterness would overtake you. And it's not so bad now compared to those times, and easy for us to take for granted. But I'm making no claims about my own abilities. I'm just saying what I saw some extraordinary people show, and I do believe that John was a saint, and that there are saints in the pews of many churches. I might have some bias to think it's more women than men. Perhaps the experience of motherhood, but there are so many saints who have just carried kindness as their moniker. And I thank you all for time. It's probably my phone. It's probably so. But anyway, it actually is my phone. Telling me my time was up. All right. Is there anybody have a question that I will? Not that I have an answer, but if anybody had one. Okay.
Did you eat at Pascal's with his dad in Atlanta?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what was your favorite meal?
Chicken. Fried chicken.
Waffles?
And, well, yeah, it had mighty good breakfast, yes.
Your exhibit goes where next?
It'll go back to Union Theological Seminary in Charlotte,
Wow.
where it's been for the last few years, and they've asked me to maybe leave it here through September, because the 1st September, Carolyn Crowder is going to be on the thing. The interview she did with civil rights figures, so she'll be here doing this, and they're hoping maybe this can stay that long enough. We'll check with Seminary whether or not they can hold out before we move it back over there. But you know, my love too, and I'm glad to see you all here. Thanks.